had a medic passed away from an overdose, and the allegation was that he obtained the medications from his medic unit. And so, and I know that a few years ago there was a paramedic that got terminated for that very issue, that he was stealing controlled substances off the medic unit, substituting them with other medications, including water in some of the medications. And then he was using them himself or selling them on the streets. And so, discovered and terminated as a result.
Breathing in diesel exhaust fumes is like walking into a fire without a mask. Over time, that exposure leads to cancer. Protect yourself with MagnaGrip. To learn more, visit magnagrip.com.
Welcome to Fire Service Court Radio. This is John Murphy. I'm flying solo today in my backyard in beautiful Washington State. We are on fire like many parts of the country. We don't have the incredible wind and rain that you guys are having on the East Coast, and tornadoes in areas that tornadoes usually don't happen. But sometimes we have legal tornadoes that we're going to be talking about, and I wish to start here pretty quick. Ordinarily, that we have Chip Comstock, I believe, is on vacation in August. He goes somewhere on the East Coast, and hopefully he's dry. And then Kurt Verone and Brad Pinsky from the East Coast as well. And I am sure they may be weathering the storms as well. So it just leaves me out here in sunny Washington. As you can see, I have my Aloha shirt on. We just came back from Hawaii, watching my grandson play a baseball tournament in the 9 to 11-year-old age group. And, the old movie with Tom Hanks and Gina Davis, I think, when started a baseball team and said there's no crying in baseball. And I can tell you that the 9 to 11-year-old Little League, there's a lot of crying that went on. And so it was good games, good education for the kids, learning a little strategics and tactical operations on the baseball diamond, as to, for an example, making a sacrificed bunt, advance to the runner, the bunt, the baseball player that did the bunt gets thrown out at first base. They're crying. And so I'm thinking, that's not what we want in baseball. And certainly that's not what we want in the fire service. So these legal shows are designed to prevent the crying that goes on in the firehouse. And I know that we've done a lot of shows in the past dealing with discrimination and workplace harassment. The sort of the bread and butter of the lawyer's existence when it comes to labor law. And we continue to make the same mistakes. So every month we're back here on the show talking about the same things. And I know that as we go around the country to do educational sessions, those issues of discrimination, workplace harassment are at the top of the list. Certainly there's pay issues, there's shift issues, there's other issues that affect the fire service that do have a legal nexus. And so we're here on a monthly basis and then a regular presentation around the country as to how to prevent those sort of litigation crying events in your fire department. Today we're going to talk about a couple things I don't think we've talked about before. And this is, I'll give Kurt Verone a plug again for his Fire Law blog website, which has the latest and the greatest in litigation and lawsuit settlements that go on around the country. And if you're interested in how much activity we have in the firehouse dealing with legal issues, just take a look at his blog, and you'll be surprised at how much goes on in the country. But I think the one thing we want to talk about is in Houston, there was an issue with take-home cars. And so for those of you who are administrative officers, chief officers, or those who have opportunity to take home your vehicle to work, we see this a lot with police officers who take their cars home. And we do see this a lot with fire departments that allow their chief officers, their fire marshals, and other individuals that have certain obligations 24 hours that they can take their vehicles home. So the assumption is that we've always been covered by the department if there's an event. And so the Houston event was a rear end motor vehicle accident where the person that was hit by a fire department car driven by a fire department employee. The department basically disavowed any responsibility similar to what we see on Mission Impossible. And so the liability lays pretty much with the driver. And so it brings to me a couple of questions. One, under our liability coverage in the fire department, are we not covered for acts of omission or liabilities or acts of commission when we're driving vehicles, either on duty when you're on the job, and when you're off duty? And so, and then that poses the question of, are we actually off duty when you're driving the car? And so I'm sure that there are many labor lawyers out there that would take a look at, well, when you're driving department vehicles, is that considered time of work? And generally has not been determined that we're always on the job 24/7, and hence we get paid 24/7. Although we would like to have that in overtime hours, I am sure. But I think there's a finite amount of time. It's a courtesy that the department allows members of the organization to take vehicles home due to the nature of their work. And then when you're on a call, you get paged out, and then you become actually activated. Then does sort of, are you on the clock for the time that you're at the emergency scene or doing the investigation, or those sorts of things? But the issue of to and fro, going to and from any sort of event after your normal working hours, and you're driving a company vehicle, are you covered under the department's liability insurance? The Houston case, we haven't seen much of this. I know that when I was issued a car as the assistant fire chief and as the fire chief, and my assumption was that the department would cover me for issues that may have arisen if I was involved in a motor vehicle accident that clearly wasn't my fault. So, for an example, if I stopped by the tavern on my way home and I was inebriated and got in a motor vehicle accident, and I think the liability would rest on me as the driver and not on the department because I was probably at fault. But the other issue is somebody who ran into me, and clearly not my fault on my way home. Does the department cover those sort of liabilities? So I think the smart thing to do is to check with your insurance individual, and to see when the coverage ends, when it starts. Is it 24/7, or is it just during the time that you're on the job? And then when you drive home in a company vehicle, are you now on your insurance? And so I have a certain insurance company that when I asked them that very question a number of years ago, they go, "Oh no, we don't cover that sort of liability because you're in uniform, hopefully, or you're going to and from your residence, and you should be covered by your department." The other issue is that sometimes, and then the third part of that is you want to make sure that the department has a policy in place that talks about the use of company vehicles while you're off duty. And so if you're issued a vehicle, and you, for an example, are going to the grocery store, or you're picking up your kids at school, or you're taking your wife to the doctor's office, and you're using your company vehicle, are you covered under somebody's liability insurance? So it's either yours or the department's, and I think we need some clarification on that issue. I believe that the Houston case here, the probably the fire department driver was surprised that she wasn't covered by the department's insurance, and so now it's hopefully that Kurt will report that how the whole thing ended up. But I would suspect that her personal insurance, or the driver's personal insurance, is on the hook for the liability of the rear end event. Sort of it's not really an unusual case. I know that there's been lots of motor vehicle incidents with department issued car, and most of them are, as I read, is because the individuals are responding to a call, and then they get caught in an accident, involving two or three other cars, and a lot of it had to do with the emergency response component of it. and it wasn't so much an off-duty issue. But the Houston case is an interesting case. The second topic here is I don't know how to say this, but controlled substances on a medic unit. And I know that we've had some discussion years ago about doing how do you control your narcotics and your sedatives and your hypnotics and all the drugs that the medics would carry on their medic unit. And the case sort of came to a head here recently in our area in Seattle Fire Department, where they had a medic. It's either Seattle Fire Department or King County Medic one, but they had a medic passed away from an overdose, and the allegation was that he obtained the medications from his medic unit. And so, and I know that a few years ago there was a paramedic that got terminated for that very issue, that he was stealing controlled substances off the medic unit, substituting them with other medications, including water in some of the medications. And then he was using them himself or selling them on the streets. And so, discovered and terminated as a result of it.
Breathing in diesel exhaust fumes is like walking into a fire without a mask. Over time, that exposure leads to cancer. Protect yourself with MagnaGrip. To learn more, visit magnagrip.com.
So it brings in the federal government. The DEA gets involved in these sorts of things because they are controlled substances. The article that was in our local newspaper here in the last couple of days, the Seattle Times, indicated that there was some sort of DEA oversight for the controlled substances on the medic units, which brings in again the question of our responsibility and liability for these sort of activities. And I know that when I was a paramedic many years ago, we only had like 2 or 3 controlled substances on our vehicles, and now there's many, several. And so every day we need to do an inventory on those to make sure that they're present. We need to make sure that they're in a locked up container, that the key access is very controlled, that we provide documentation on a periodic basis and do an audit on those particular medications. And that if you use them, you need to record the fact that maybe if you didn't use, the complete 10 milligrams of morphine in whatever device that you're currently carrying, how did you dispose of the remainder? Was it squirted out on the ground? Was it shot into another container? And so, you want to account for, every milligram of any sort of controlled substance that you are responsible for, and that your doctor is responsible for in the long run. So a lesson I think learned here is that if you do carry controlled substances, you need to control those substances. You need to ensure that there's an accountability log that's just not pencil whipped, but you actually take a look at the medication. You make sure that the vial or the Tubex or whatever, or the ampule, whatever's out, containing the material, is full and unbroken, and that the inventory numbers at the end of the shift match what the off-going shift inventoried before they left the station. The other person that I know, that because I'm as a provider, as a PA provider, I have a DEA license and I can prescribe controlled substances, which I generally don't because of the addictive issues that we're seeing in society. But if when I work in a clinic that does have controlled substances, we do an inventory every morning, and we do an inventory when we leave, and so to make sure that it balances out, that nobody got into the material and that either stole it or used it or whatever. And if there is something missing, it's like everything stops in the clinic until we find the missing vial or Tubex or ampule or whatever's containing the material, and we do an inventory. And we do sort of a quasi investigation to find out, did we use this on a patient? How much did we use? Where's the remainder? Who did the administration? Who signed off on the order for the injection? And there's a lot of checks and balances in there. And I think sometimes we fail to perform these basic tasks until we get an event like this with a the paramedic overdosed and died as a result of that, or another paramedic was caught stealing and using and terminated as a result of his actions. So I think a couple of key points here is have an inventory system. You're required to do it anyway. Have a policy on administration, disposal, and inventory. Make sure that the material that you have that's considered a controlled substance is controlled in a locked box, and the box is actually locked through the because it's in our units, and we're seeing, unfortunately, increasing thefts of fire department equipment and material. There was just a large theft, I think, in one of our fire districts here in Western Washington, where they stole about $16,000 to $20,000 worth of fire equipment, including radios and tools and bunker clothing and SCBA's, and people are breaking into our vehicles. So you want to make sure that they're not breaking into the vehicle to steal your drugs, because that creates a huge liability for the organization. So enough said on that topic. And then the final topic is, and I know that there's no answer to this right now, and it's just going to be time tested, but OSHA and NFPA are getting together, and many of you people are concerned that OSHA NFPA rewrite for the emergency standards or emergency response standard is going to severely affect your organization. And I'm not here to say it's not going to affect your organization. And I'm not here to say it's going to affect your organization. Other than the caveat is there's going to be a change, and it's going to affect many of the organizations on how we operate, how we train, how we provide entry into an organization that for new members. And so one of the interesting things is that when Congress or rulemaking agencies such as OSHA starts to adopt new standards, they're usually the ones that will sort of clarify the what it actually means. And so, and for those of you who are interested in Supreme Court rulings, the Supreme Court recently decided that in a case that it's, let me grab the little blurb here. So the entitlement, or the title on the Supreme Court website is Supreme Court strikes down the Chevron curtailing power of federal agencies. So Chevron is a rule that started about 40 plus years ago to sort of clarify legislative intent. So Congress passes a rule, and one of the citations that they used in here was the Clean Water Act. And so there's no expectation that judges would be technically competent to offer an opinion on what clean water actually looks like. So they defer to these sort of agencies to clarify the rule. So EPA is one of the agencies that clarified the clean water rule, and that's been the rule for like ever, for 40 years. And so recently, the way that this reads is that in a major ruling, the Supreme Court on a certain day cut back sharply on the power of federal agencies to interpret the laws they administer, and rules that courts should rely on their own interpretation of ambiguous laws. And so I think that when we see the OSHA and NFPA rewrite, there's going to be a lot of ambiguity in there. And so the expectation is who's going to clarify those ambiguities. And so further on in the discussion from the Supreme Court blog, they talk about local judges, especially at the federal level, are going to be taking a look at these sort of administrative laws, and then how are they going to interpret them. And as a lawyer, I can see a disaster coming down the road where you may have 10 judges that have 10 different opinions on how you're going to interpret an OSHA rule, where OSHA and its regulatory agency should be the ones to clarify those rules to make it easy for you and for me to administer them in my own department. And so the OSHA NFPA rewrite is still in review. It's probably 20 years in the making. I know that there's been some background dialogue. They talk about ever since 9/11, and there's sort of safety issues that occurred during the cleanup and all that sort of stuff that OSHA's been chomping at the bit in order to get some traction on increased safety. And so they've decided that they would take a look at, coupling with the NFPA standards, which is, again, as we know, are guidelines, and damn good guidelines, of course. I don't want to minimize those, the language that's in there, because it's basically set the sort of the template for many organizations. But now we're going to have this sort of boiling point of, whose standard and what standard has been interpreted and how it's going to affect our organizations. The Chevron decision, if you're interested in that sort of legal precedent, has been sort of guiding our actions and many, many other actions administratively for over 40 years. So now we're going to get this sort of setback where we're going to have, as Justice Kagan says, it's going to be almost an unworkable scenario where you have multiple federal judges offering opinions on a single issue. And certainly the OSHA NFPA rewrite on the emergency standard is going to be, oh my gosh. So, and that's not a legal opinion, that's a personal opinion. So I think that we need, as a fire industry, we need to, basically be very, very cognitive of the fact that there are new rules coming down the road that's going to affect your operations immensely. I think we need to be aware of how that affects you and what the sort of the opinions that we're going to be getting from non-scientific, non-expert judge opinions. And I love judges. I don't want to put a bad taste in their mouth when I appear before them in a court, but I think that sometimes, it's not there in their wheelhouse. In order to interpret a rule, they have no idea what's going on. And so good luck to all of us. So without further ado, I appreciate you guys spending the 20 minutes with me. I'm sorry that my cohort attorneys didn't show up today, but they're all busy. And I know Chip's on vacation, hard earned and well deserved. So without further ado, we will see you next month. Be legally safe. Remember, there's no crying in the firehouse, and there's basically no litigation that should go on. So consult with your attorney, get an attorney's advice. Don't do boneheaded things. Read Kurt Barone's Fire Law blog site to see what the last department got into trouble for, and try to avoid all those mistakes and avoid legal fires in your organization. So again, thank you. Be safe, especially those that are doing wildland firefighting and those that are doing swiftwater rescue, especially on the East Coast. So without further ado, goodbye.